12. January 1962. Landkreis Augsburg. A municipal clinic that smells of disinfectant and coal. Karl writes a line he will not say aloud. Back then they called it research. Today they call it progress. The bodies have changed. The language has not. He signs a prescription. He locks a drawer. Inside, reports from 1943. Typed, stamped, initialed. He reads the words he once used. He recognizes their afterlife in the words he uses now. This is the story of a doctor who learned how a country hides things in paper. It is the story of a country that preferred paper to speech. It is the arithmetic of forgetting written in the hand that examined lungs and pulses. May 1945. Munich. Rubble rises like a new geography. A woman with a scarf takes a crowbar to a wall. She is a Trümmerfrau. She has a new discipline made of sore arms and time. The city shrinks to the parts the tram can reach. The trams are not running. People walk. Karl steps around bricks that used to be a pharmacy. He is 34. He carries a bag. He carries no papers. He carries no papers. He carries words he will subtract from his story later. An occupation report filed by an American civil affairs officer in June 1945 says what we can say now. Munich presents a landscape of stone erosion, 50% of buildings damaged or totally collapsed, civilians displaced, destitute and disoriented. Medical facilities operating at reduced capacity, significant shortages of supplies. The report notes a curious politeness. People wait for things that do not come. On 8 May, the Germans call it capitulation. On 9 May, it is silence. On 10 May, it is curfew. Allied tanks roll through streets named for poets and generals. Road signs change. Flags change. The weather does not. Fear lives where the doors sag on broken hinges. Germans expect retribution. Allied leaflets mention accountability. The arithmetic of consequence looks simple in print: crime, investigation, trial. In practice, it is improvisation. In practice, it is hunger. Karl learns the mathematics of hunger in the first 2 weeks. 2 potatoes for 3 days plus 1 ladle of soup equals dizziness at noon. A ration card is an equation. Stamps for bread, stamps for fat, stamps for meat that does not exist. The official calories per day for an adult in Munich in June 1945, around 1,200. The human body shrinks under numbers like that. The cold of winter will shrink it further. There is a market that is not a market. Cigarettes become currency. 1 American pack equals 10 loaves if the baker is tired and the policeman is not looking. A doctor's note, once a symbol of bourgeois stability, is now a scrap traded for soap. Allied intelligence summaries describe the emergence of black market economy with professional specialization. But the word professional is elastic. A woman with a baby and a basket becomes an entrepreneur. A widow becomes a broker with a secret ledger under the mattress. The missing are everywhere. The missing leave holes that have to be counted to be believed. Letters arrive addressed to men who sat in mines and factory barracks in Poland, men who did not come back from Stalingrad, men who wore black uniforms. The postman becomes a messenger who cannot apologize enough. A list of missing hangs at the Hofbräuhaus. The letters next to the names read Vermisst, Verschollen, in sowjetischer Gefangenschaft. The arithmetic of hope keeps people alive for a year or two. Karl avoids the lists. He avoids a different list. He avoids the list of names in an Allied notebook that matches Sturmbannführer with Doctor. In July 1945, he goes to a parish office in an old school building. He asks for a letter from a priest who knew his father. The priest writes that Karl is a good Catholic. He writes that Karl helped a child with pneumonia in 1939 without accepting payment. He writes what is asked. He does not write where Karl was in 1942. He does not write the words selection or transport. He would not have known those words in that year, or he would not have written them. A few kilometers from Munich is an American-installed displaced persons camp at Feldafing. It is full of people who do not want to speak German. It is full of languages that blow past the barbed wire like leaves. DP camp administrators write weekly reports. They list the diseases spreading in summer. They list shortages. They list morale. A DP doctor writes, "We treat with limited supplies and unlimited pain." He lists the number of typhus cases. He lists the number of children born. He lists how many of the mothers survive. Down the road in a Bavarian town, a farmer says to an American officer that he did not know. He says he thought it was an industrial complex. He says he had his own worries. The American officer writes in his file, "The denials are uniform. The smoking chimneys were visible from the fields." He does not know Karl yet. He will meet him on paper. September 1945. Bavaria. Questionnaires arrive like an early winter. A forest of paper covers wooden desks. These are the Fragebogen. These are the forms that will decide who is who. Name, date of birth, positions held, party membership, affiliations, donations, ranks. Were you a member of the NSDAP? Were you a member of the SS? Were you a member of the NS Erstebund? The arts of subtraction improve. People edit their pasts as if trimming a hedge. The official name for this process is denazification. It is a word that will mean different things by December. An Allied intelligence summary estimates that 85 million Germans belonged to the NSDAP by war's end. A historian will later write that approximately 13 million Fragebogen were distributed and that about 3.5 million hearings occurred. The categories are simple: Hauptschuldige, major offenders; Belastate offenders; Mittelbelastate, lesser offenders; Mittelauftate, lesser offenders; Mittelauftate, exonerated. The mathematics of guilt begins as a rough division. It ends as a set of convenient proportions. Karl receives a questionnaire. He sits at a table with an unshaded bulb and a borrowed pen. He writes, "Doctor since 1937. Wehrmacht Service Medical Unit, 1940 W Mine, 1 Hospital Post, 1941, Hospital Post, 1944. He leaves out an assignment that exists in a file elsewhere. He writes NSDAP, 1940. He writes SS, no. He attaches the letter from the priest. He attaches a statement by a nurse who says he was humane. He does not write what he did on a day in August 1942 when he stood by a railway siding and looked at wrists and cheeks and test results for 5 hours. He thinks of that day as triage. He will later think of it as streamlining. He will later not think about it. A Sprechkammer in Munich convenes in early 1947. The denazification courts consist of German jurists and lay judges under Allied oversight. Orders change monthly. Rules shift. The docket moves slowly. People wait. Karl's file is thin. The record is short. The court notes the letter from the priest, the statement from the nurse, the absence of party office, the lack of evidence of fanaticism. The court notes the need for doctors. The transcript contains a quote. "I followed orders as a hospital doctor and fought no one," Karl says. "It is a line that will echo in 1,000 rooms." The court issues its finding, Category 4. Mitläufer, a follower. The penalty, a fine, a temporary ban on holding public employment, a requirement to attend a lecture on democracy that he will skip because the lecturer will be ill that day. An Allied occupation report in October 1947 acknowledges the friction between justice and life. Professionals are needed to rebuild basic services. Denazification thus shows variable rigor depending on sector. The report names doctors. It notes that doctors were overrepresented in the party during the Third Reich. Internal documents of the American military government cite that as much as 45% of German physicians were NSDAP members, a higher proportion than teachers or lawyers. An American officer writes in his diary, "We are treating the sick with the hands we would rather restrain." Karl returns to work. He returns through a side door. Nuremberg, 9 December 1946. Palace of Justice. The United States v. Karl Brandt et al. Begins. The doctor's trial is a new assignment in the arithmetic of accountability. The indictment lists murder, torture, and other inhumane acts. The words medical experiment are placed on a table and opened like a device. Photographs are held up. Witnesses speak of icy water and lost limbs. Witnesses speak of gas. The judges will write a code that says human beings must consent to be experimented upon. In Augsburg, a German physician reads the newspaper and underlines names he recognizes. He underlines Russia. He underlines Dachau. He writes in his own pocket calendar, "Not us, we did not do that." His memory obeys him. The Nuremberg Code is famous in English. It is less famous in German clinics in 1947. A memorandum of the Bavarian Medical Association in 1948 mentions ethical conduct and the honor of the profession. It does not mention the code by name. It does not mention Dachau. It does not mention selections. It speaks of a rotten past and the need for self-cleansing. The courts convict 16 and acquit 7. 7 receive death sentences. Karl reads the sentences as cautionary tales that apply to others. He keeps the drawer locked. Winter 1946-47 is called the Hunger Winter. Rations drop. Trains jam with frozen coal. The calorie arithmetic shifts downward, 1,000 a day, sometimes 700 for the unlucky. The Cold War is without a name yet, but it has the mathematics of misalignment. The West sends flour. Later, the West will send money. The currency reform arrives on 20 June 1948. The Reichsmark dies. The Deutsche Mark appears in envelopes. Each citizen gets 40 marks, then 20 more. The black market shivers and collapses in a week. Shop windows grow fruit. The speed feels miraculous. It is a carefully planned probability. American historians will call it a necessary correction. German housewives will call it a good week. Karl stands in line for his envelope. He watches a stall open shutters and put canned peaches on a shelf. He buys a brush. He buys a notebook. He writes 2 words on the first page, Nachkrieg. Weiter. From rubble to steel is not a straight line. The Marshall Plan sends shipments. Bundles labeled with English words arrive at depots. Flour, machinery parts, flour, medical supplies, ampoules under brown glass. Karl opens a crate. He reads the labels. He thinks of an inventory he signed in 1943 that listed barometric chamber and thermoregulatory basin. He thinks of how things become euphemisms when stamped. The arithmetic of displacement is the largest calculation on the national ledger. In 1945 and 1946, millions come from the East. They come from Silesia, East Prussia, Pomerania, the Sudetenland. They bring quilts and clocks. They bring photos of home. They bring a dialect. They fill rooms that locals considered already full. In a village near Augsburg, the town council minutes from February 1946 read, "We must accommodate 37 persons from the East within existing housing stock." The minutes list square meters. They list how many bed frames can be made from the lumber of a collapsed barn. They list names of families who will take families. The tension is described without adjectives. A local writes in a letter, "We have to share, and now there is shouting." An expellee writes in a letter, "The eyes of the locals say that we are strangers." The arithmetic of scarce food becomes the arithmetic of scarce patients. A school converts its cloakroom into a classroom. A hospital converts a storage room into a ward. Karl watches men build partitions out of doors. An Allied civil affairs officer writes, "The News Germans and the Old Germans compete at the margin for work, rooms, and attention. The possibility of political agitation cannot be dismissed." The officer does not mention the violence that is displaced into looks. Karl treats a boy with a cough. The boy's mother is from Königsberg. She shows a photograph of a house with a tree. She says the tree might still be there. She asks if the boy's cough could be from the train. Karl says, "It is from the cold." He writes a prescription that the pharmacy cannot fill. The clinic hires a woman with strong arms. She broke stones in 1945. In 1946, she carried 2 buckets of bricks for 8 hours a day. In 1947, she washed bedpans. She knows how to lift things that do not want to be lifted. Displaced persons live in camps within walking distance. They have their own doctors. They have their own committees. They publish a newspaper in Yiddish. A German policeman stands at the gate and writes down numbers. A German child walks past and hears songs that sound like wails. The child asks his mother why the people are still behind fences. The mother says, "It is complicated. It is the arithmetic of categories that persists into peace." Contact with victims is a ledger entry often marked "seen" or "turned away." A young nurse at the clinic wrote in her notebook on 15 August 1945, "I met a woman with a tattoo on her arm. I did not know what to ask. She did not want me to touch her. I think she was Russian or Polish, maybe Jewish. She spoke to the American. She did not look at me." The nurse crossed out the next line. Elsewhere, a German teacher is made to visit a nearby camp with his class. He writes in his diary, "We saw the barracks. We saw a pile of shoes. The guide spoke. I wished to be invisible." The sentence yields no moral, only a method of not speaking. Silence is not a conspiracy. It is an economy. It budgets words like sugar. It budgets memory like coal. The denazification files grow. The Spruchkammern adjust their categories. In Hesse, a statistical summary notes that by mid-1948, about 1% have been classified as major offenders, 3% as offenders, 12% as minor offenders, the rest as followers or exonerated. The mathematics of guilt resolves into a bell curve with a narrow tail. It conforms to the country. Medical associations rise again. In Cologne in 1947, the West German medical chambers meet as an Arbeitsgemeinschaft. They declare that medicine must be free of state ideology. They declare that medicine will cleanse itself. Selbstreinigung enters meeting minutes like a cologne. It smells clean. It masks. Bundesarchiv records from the early 1950s show the minutes of professional assemblies. They discuss fees, hours, and the supply of penicillin. They pass resolutions on medical honor. They do not pass resolutions on Nuremberg. They note in one marginal remark that discussions of the past tend to the political and are best avoided in the interests of unity. The unity is real. The avoidance is a technique. A private document preserved in a family archive in Swabia shows a different record. A doctor writes to a colleague, "The Americans hang a few at Nuremberg to make a point. The rest of us must be cautious and carry on." The colleague replies, "We must recapture our domain from politics." The word politics is where he puts the bodies. Karl's hospital expands. New wings rise. A small laboratory gets better glass. He studies X-rays of chests. He reads about streptomycin. He writes to a supplier about price. He becomes a man in a white coat that looks like many other white coats. The uniform he wore in 1943 becomes a memory he does not take out of the drawer. A boy thanks him for treating his bronchitis. A mother brings eggs. The Wirtschaftswunder is not a miracle, but a set of mechanisms. Currency reform, American aid, a skilled labor force, a conservative fiscal policy, a union movement willing to negotiate. The arithmetic of growth replaces the arithmetic of ration cards. Food is measured in menus, not stamps. Television replaces neighbors as evening occupation. Washing machines replace hands. The nation gains weight. The Cold War arrives in policy and border posts. In 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany is proclaimed in Bonn. In 1949, the German Democratic Republic is proclaimed in East Berlin. The two states will develop different stories about the same past. The East will say that anti-fascists defeated fascism and that criminals fled west. The West will say that the past is complicated and the future is important. Both will be partly right. Both will not be sufficient. In 1951, Article 31 of the Basic Law is addressed by a law that allows the reinstatement of former civil servants who had lost their positions. This is the year many men returned to desks. This is the year many men returned to white coats with pensions attached. The mathematics of the new state requires administrators who know how to administrators who know how to administrators. The mathematics of the old state ensures that those administrators are the same men, minus the party badges. Doctors benefit, not all doctors. A statistic from a 1990 study will later reveal that the proportion of physicians with NSDAP membership was high, that camp physicians returned to regional hospitals, that euthanasia campaign doctors found new positions. An Allied intelligence report from 1946 already notes, doctors and police constitute the most problematic categories for democratic reconstruction due to previous alignment, but medical expertise cannot be dispensed with. The problem becomes a precedent. There are exceptions. There are men who hang. There are men sentenced to prison. There is Dr. Herta Oberhauser, convicted at Nuremberg for experiments at Ravensbrück, released in 1952, practicing with renewed license in a small town until local agitation and a court decision end it in 1958. Her case makes headlines and then is folded away. There is Dr. Hertaway. Werner Heide, a neurologist who organized the selection process in the euthanasia program, living under the name Fritz Sawade in Schleswig-Holstein until 1959, treating patients, respected, consulted by courts in evaluating mental competence cases. His exposure in 1959 prompts shock and a ritual reckoning. It will end in 1964 with a suicide in a prison cell, but in 1959 it is a mirror held up to a face that pretends to be someone else's. Carl reads about the Sawade case in a newspaper in the hospital cafeteria. An orderly says, "How could this be?" A senior surgeon says, "Let the courts do their work." A nurse says nothing. Carl feels the drawer key in his pocket, as if it were suddenly heavy. He knows that Heide's ability to practice depended on colleagues who did not ask. He knows that self-cleansing is less a washing and more a careful redirection of gaze. He knows the signatures on certificates, the way professional chambers issue clean bills of moral health. He knows because he has one. He keeps track of the minutes of the Bavarian Medical Chamber. He attends a meeting in 1952 where a proposal to include a reference to the Nuremberg Code in the state's Medical Code of Conduct is tabled. The minutes note, general support for ethical principles, concern about legal codification that could hamper necessary clinical research. The word necessary is heavy here. It does work that 3 sentences would do better. Karl opens the drawer in 1953 and pulls out a report from 1943. It describes a sequence with numbers. Subject 1, 23-year-old male. Subject 2, 19-year-old female. It mentions pre-existing hunger. It mentions pulmonary function under hypoxia. It uses the verb behaved to describe what happened under conditions arranged by men in coats. He reads the line he wrote, selection criteria, robust, no obvious cardiac compromise, no TB. He remembers the faces as a category. He knows he cannot speak that knowledge into the room where he prescribes a cough syrup. He knows he cannot speak that knowledge into the living room where his children watch a variety show. He knows that if he said the word selection the way he used it then, he would silence a house. In the public sphere, the language changes shape. A hometown paper runs a story in 1955 on the dedication of a monument to the fallen. It lists names from 1939 to 1945. It shows a stone with a steel helmet. It quotes a pastor who speaks of sacrifice, sorrow, and reconciliation. It does not say the word guilt. It does not say victims. It is an arithmetic of grief that omits a column. School books in 1956 carry a timeline. They name Hitler and call him a dictator. They mention the war and the bombings. They mention suffering in general. They reserve the specific for specialists. A school inspector writes in his report that children must learn civic virtue and constitutional order. The past should not be a burden impossible to carry. The sentence fails to distinguish weight from cost. There are exceptions. A civics teacher in Ulm assigns the Nuremberg judgments as reading. His class stays quiet. An outspoken student underlines the word consent and writes in the margin, "Did our doctors not know this?" The teacher answers in private, "They knew. They did not wish to know. He will file no report." 10 years after the war, Karl receives a letter from a patient whose father disappeared in 1941. The letter says, "I thought you might have known him from the hospital. He was at a work detail. He had an infection." Karl looks at the name. He looks at the date. He looks at his drawer. He writes back, "I do not recall the individual. Records were lost in the war." He folds the truth into the passive voice. He licks the stamp. There are moments when the truth moves in public. 1958. A series of articles in a weekly magazine collects narratives from victims of medical experiments. The editors gather names. The lawyers argue about libel. The defendant doctors respond with phrases like exaggeration and taken out of context, and the demands of wartime research. Professional associations make statements about isolated cases that do not represent the honor of the profession. The association does not offer numbers. The arithmetic of professional self-cleansing is a double column. On one side, committees, resolutions, and a code of conduct that cites Hippocrates. On the other side, personnel decisions, votes, and sealed files. In state archives, entries read, Zugang nur mit besonderer Genehmigung. Access by special permission. In a file at the Bavarian Interior Ministry, the name Karl appears in a typed list under a category labeled Urgde, vorübergehend politisch belastet, derzeit entlastet. The note reads, Keine weiteren Maßnahmen empfohlen. No further measures recommended. The file is initialed, folded, tied with string. When Karl's children ask him about the war, he says, "It was bad." He says, "We were hungry." He tells them about bomb shelters. He tells them about rubble. He tells them about the day their mother baked a cake from potato peels. He does not tell them about needles and selections. He does not tell them about the letter from 1953 in which a colleague wrote, "I fear we may be found out." He puts that letter in the drawer. The war after the war has fewer uniforms. It has uniforms only in the sense that white coats are uniforms too. It has a front line drawn through clinics and town hall offices. The Western Allies shift their posture. In 1947, they wanted to prosecute. In 1948, they needed administrators. In 1949, they wanted allies against Moscow. By 1950, priorities are set: stability, growth, integration. The arithmetic of priorities is a set of weights. Justice weighs less than bread. Memory weighs less than a new roof. Karl's colleague in pediatrics is an expellee from Breslau. He drinks too much. He fears state inspectors. He does not attend political meetings. They both apply for membership in the reconstituted medical chamber. The application asks whether they are worthy to represent the profession. Their friends at the chamber sign off. Worthiness is a function of who vouches. In 1952, the Bavarian Chamber initiates a survey of doctors' political reliability. Minutes note, "We wish to avoid infiltration by communist elements." No one speaks of fascist residues. The residue hardens into the structure. Meanwhile, an East German newspaper runs an exposé on a West German clinic. It names names, some wrongly. It names names of men who were indeed in brown or black uniforms. The East uses the past as a weapon. The West uses the past as a negotiation. Karl reads. He trusts neither. He trusts his drawer. He sees the DP camp disappear into housing. The barbed wire comes down. People move into apartments. Some people move away to new places where they will learn how to spell Brooklyn or Haifa. The rest become neighbors. The category victim becomes a category over there, a category suitable for memorial speeches but not for the rhythm of groceries. The arithmetic of distance increases as the years pass. A Bund Deutscher Vertriebenen rally in 1955 fills a fairground. Speeches speak of injustice and right of return. A banner reads, "Recht ist Recht." The phrase is harder than memory. It frames suffering as a currency to be exchanged for political capital. In a crowd stands a woman who once queued at Feldafing behind barbed wire. She reads the banner and thinks, "Mine is not on the scale." The pamphlet distributed by a local women's association after a memorial for bombing victims in 1953 lists the number of homes destroyed in the town. It lists the names of the dead. It does not list the number of people sent from the town to die elsewhere. It lists the number of times the siren sounded. It does not list the number of trains that left. This is not an indictment of a town. It is a description of a method of staying alive among neighbors. In 1957, a new chief physician is appointed in a city to the north. He has a record of competence and a quiet manner. He once lectured at an SS medical academy. It is not in his file. It is not in the advertisement. It is in a box in an archive with a note that says Emil S. NS Erste Bund, 1935, SS 1935, SS 1937 to 1945. He will retire in 1972 with a citation for service. In 1959, the case of Fritz Sawadi Haider breaks. Judges answer with phrases like misled and unaware. The medical chamber says, he was recommended by colleagues. Recommendations are networks. Networks are made of telephone calls. One doctor writes another, a short note in 1950. A good man, politically untainted. The lie is a convenience. The convenience is a structure. In 1961, the Eichmann trial in Jerusalem broadcasts testimony into German living rooms. The words selection and ramp and transport are heard in the language of news. Karl sits at his kitchen table and reads a newspaper account. He drinks schnapps. He folds the paper and puts it in the drawer. He writes in his notebook, "We used the same verbs." He crosses out the sentence. 1962. The clinic calendar says January. The streets are. Carl has a patient, a shopkeeper who lost his left hand in an artillery strike in 1945. The shopkeeper speaks easily about the past. He calls it the shit and laughs. He tells Carl that young people know nothing. He tells him the air is cleaner now. Carl has another patient, a woman in her 30s who was a forced laborer in 1943 and married a German in 1946. She speaks German with vowels that stretch. She tells Carl that her son has asthma. She shows a card from a DP office. Carl tells her she needs to keep the flat clean. He does not ask about her past. He does not ask if she remembers the face of a doctor who did not look at her in 1943. He does not want to find himself in her memory. In his drawer, the 1943, reports smell like something else because paper ages differently than breath. He reads the clinical language and recognizes that it did the work of a weapon. He sees that the words subject and allocation and regulation are also words in his job now. He knows that ethical change comes not only from new laws, but from replacing old sentences. He thinks of the young doctor he supervises. The young doctor wants to run a trial of a new drug on volunteers. He writes a protocol. He asks for consent. He uses the word as if it had always been there. It was not. It was put there by a court in Nuremberg, by witnesses in 1946 and 1947 who spoke through interpreters in a building with columns. It was put there and then resisted and then adopted slowly. The adoption has no public monument. Carl writes a note to himself. The new democracy rests on bargains. We bargain for peace and prosperity and do not ask questions that would cost us the bargain. He tears the note in half. He puts it in the drawer anyway. He meets another doctor at a conference in Stuttgart. The man worked in a hospital near a camp. He speaks in generalities. He complains about the swirl of accusations that came in the late 1950s. He says, with clinical detachment, we must focus on the future. Carl nods. On the train back, he writes a line. Focusing on the future was how we did the past. Outside the window, trees move backwards. Inside the carriage, a newspaper lists the economic growth rate, 5.5% last year. The Chancellor speaks about a guiding moral order. The Archbishop speaks about individual conscience. The filmmaker releases a movie about a courtroom and calls it a wakeful sleep. A Bundesarchiv record for a conference in Baden-Württemberg in 1960 shows a debate about whether to open professional disciplinary proceedings against a doctor accused of euthanasia participation. The minutes show indecision. They show a vote. The vote is to do nothing pending legal outcomes. The legal outcomes will take years. The doctor will retire in the meantime. The arithmetic of delay is a quieter kind of absolution. Carl receives a questionnaire in 1961 from a new state inquiry about crimes under National Socialism. He is asked if he knows of any colleagues who committed acts that could be considered criminal under current law. He puts the paper in the drawer for weeks. He takes it out. He writes, "Num." He puts it in an envelope. He seals the envelope with glue that tastes like childhood. The telephone rings in February 1962. It is an old colleague, one who left for the East in 1946 and then fled back west in 1953. They speak about the weather. They speak about fees. They do not speak about 1943. When the call ends, Carl looks at his hand and sees it not as flesh but as a signature. He understands that his life has been a long signing off on the forms that make forgetting possible. He opens the drawer. He reads the names in the 1943 report. He knows that someone else reads a stone. He knows that if he stood by the stone and spoke the names, someone would shush him out of habit. He knows the habit is how the country functions. He writes in his notebook. The front line after 1945 goes through my desk. He writes the opening line again. He adds a new sentence. The progress is real. The forgetting is real. The guilt is arithmetic. The memory is a wound that scabs and is peeled by headlines. He closes the notebook. He locks the drawer. He goes to a ward where a nurse checks a pulse. He puts a stethoscope in his ear. He listens for a rhythm under a ribcage and hears a sound that is older than politics. He signs another prescription. He walks past a wall with a framed certificate. The certificate has his name. It is signed by a chamber that has a room where a file with his name is sealed. He thinks of the Sprüchkammer's categories. He thinks of the gentle word Mitläufer. He thinks of how in his case following looked like not asking why a man in a different uniform called a line of people a material allocation. He thinks of how his language made the affair practical instead of poisonous. On Sundays he walks with his children past a monument. They read the names on the stone. He reads names that are not there in a drawer that will one day be emptied by someone else. He wonders if the drawer will survive him. He writes again late at night. I practiced medicine under 2 orders. In the first, the words cured tea